also make a case that SAGAR should be applied to India, meaning there must be security and growth for your own people, for your own coastal states, frankly, for all of India.
Yes.
And only then can you say that I have a template that I can take to a Maldives, I can take to a Sri
In the field
Lanka.
of security, I think the biggest change has been the setting up of the Office of the National Maritime Security Coordinators.
Yeah.
Where you had, this domain was spread across numerous agencies all across governments. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of WM Dialogues. For this one, we are outside Delhi, and I'm delighted to have as my guest none other than Commodore Uday Bhaskar. I think he is well known to all of you. He is currently the director of the Society of Policy Studies, but apart from that, has been right since my earlier years in service, has been, a strong thinker on all matters maritime. And has published in numerous places and numerous articles. The list is sort of endless. So today's discussion, I thought we will do on SAGAR and MAHASAGAR. So these were huge policy initiatives. SAGAR, of course, was announced in Mauritius in 2015. At the time that we were handing over INS Barracuda, if I recollect, to Mauritius. And now that's security and growth for all in the region. And now recently, much more recently, in March 2025, the SAGAR has now morphed into MAHASAGAR. That is mutual and holistic advancement of security and growth for all in the region. So it's a step ahead, really. So, sir, I thought let's just start. And can you sort of walk back with us and tell us about the conceptualization of SAGAR and how it has sort of panned out over the years, over the last decade?
First of all, Monty, thank you for inviting me to the WM Dialogues. I have been watching, what you and your team have been putting together, and allow me to commend you. I hope this will get traction in the near future. And also, I think for a very elegant introduction, short of saying that I'm Rip Van Winkle, you have given me a very generous introduction. Thank you. But specific to SAGAR and MAHASAGAR, it's a very interesting kind of transition. You rightly pointed out that SAGAR is 2015, which is the equivalent of Modi 1.0, meaning Prime Minister Modi was in his first tenure. And he unveiled what at that time, I remember writing about it and we all welcomed it because it was the first time that I can remember that at the level of a Prime Minister, India was talking about a very major policy initiative related to the maritime domain. Now, we all know that the acronym SAGAR was security and growth for all in the region. And the very fact that he had made this announcement in Mauritius suggested that we are looking outside of India, security and growth for India's maritime neighbors. And it was the island states, Mauritius, Maldives, Sri Lanka, with whom India has traditionally had a very, very strong relationship, and clearly the maritime domain was the natural kind of area for engagement. This was 2015. And we also know that it got disaggregated into specifics, meaning that there was greater activity on the security dimension, the S part of the acronym. Growth had to be addressed by a different team and it had different requirements. So if you look back from 2015 to 2025, which is the transition or the scaling up that from security and growth for all in the region, which initially meant the Indian Ocean region. So we were looking at immediate neighbors with whom India had a certain degree of contact. Perhaps we had not embraced the other neighbors, whether it was, for instance, the Seychelles, which is further away, or we were looking at East Africa, or we were looking at the southernmost part of Southeast Asia, which technically falls into the larger ambit of the Indian Ocean. But my own interpretation at that time was that it was perhaps desirable to start small, meaning that establish that you can bring something to the table and your neighbors are able to benefit from your policy initiative of security and growth. So if you were to look back, and this is my personal assessment, please correct me if I'm wrong because you have been in the loop for a greater period and more recently than me. My reading of Sagar is that the security track moved a little ahead of growth because it was easier, I suppose, because of the established protocols. For India, for instance, it had a maritime security arrangement with these island states. In specifics, for instance, surveillance was a very important area, and we know that we had a trilateral, if you remember, which predates Sagar. It goes back to the time when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was in office, and at that time the NSA, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, had initiated the three island activity. Subsequently, of course, other strands were added, for instance, the Colombo initiative and so on. So this is my summary, that when you look back at 10 years of Saga, we'll come to Mahasagar in a moment, that perhaps security moved with greater traction and with a greater sense of objectives. Whereas I am not able to say the same thing about the growth part. Growth has to address human security. Growth has to address the state security, meaning whether it's a Mauritius, whether it's a Maldives, whether it's a Sri Lanka. How much of growth did they actually obtain, or how much did they benefit in terms of tangibles, GDP, trade, etc.? I don't have a clear sense that we've done much on that. But again, I would defer to you, and please correct me if I missed out anything in the broad assessment of Saga.
So I would think, sir, actually, you're right that, I think security has got a lot more visibility in that sense. Because the connection between security and Sagar has been a little more, I would say, firm in that respect. There are things which have been done on growth also. For example, large infrastructure projects which have taken place in Maldives, for example. I mean, upgradation of certain airports, island connectivity, bridges that are being built over there. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, at the time of need, when they were facing economic collapse, the large part of the funding came from India. I really think it's more of a branding issue, sir. That while we are doing all this, somehow we've not been able to bring Sagar central to all this, and amalgamate all this into a brand, and that brand of Sagar, sir. So Sagar is more, it's a policy statement, but it is more like a slogan right now. So to convert that into an instrument where you aggregate everything that you're doing and bring it under a common construct, I think you'll get a lot more traction that way. So in that sense, I think there is a lot to be done. And for that, I mean, if you see, for example, what the Chinese have done with the BRIs, where they've set up a whole mechanism, they've set up a whole office, they've brought in everything under a single scheme. So I think there's a lot of work more that requires to be done to rope in everything. And once you do that, then you have a clearer sense of prioritization of how best you can convert your funding into influence, or your all these sort of, they can be much more rational decision making that can be done if you rope it also. But one thing I wanted to ask.
But can I just pause you here briefly?
Yes.
Since you mentioned BRI,
Yes, sir.
this is something that I've also been thinking about. And I think I've written about this, after Prime Minister Modi had announced MAHASAGAR
Yes.
in 2025. So it's interesting. I don't think this was intended, but Mauritius 2015,
Yes,
Mauritius 2025, March of this year, you remember. And now Mahasagar is clearly far more ambitious.
Yes.
It's talking about mutual and holistic advancement of whatever had been achieved on Saga. That's my understanding. That you're talking about scaling up.
Yes.
Both in terms of the verticals, meaning whatever security you have been able to generate under Sagar, that you're able to do it at a higher level in terms of the security or the texture of security, and also that you're able to scale up growth in any which way, whether it's an airport, whether it's a bridge, whether it's a harbor, whether it is better fishing facilities. And ultimately, I keep saying that this must come under the broader umbrella of the blue economy and impact human security. Which means the HDR, the indicators that we had under the UN, etc., Human Development Report indicators. But Mahasagar currently is a glint in the Modi eye, if I could put it that way, meaning that it's a very great, and I'm sure his team has worked on this, and it sounds good, Sagar to Mahasagar. The very word Maha, in the Indian context, in Hindustani, has a number of connotations. And yes, I agree with you that it has the potential to be something corresponding to BRI.
Yes.
It may not be similar, but
Yes,
corresponding to BRI in terms of its vision.
Yes.
It's India's kind of outreach. But the pause button I want to hit is to say that before we embark on Mahasagar, I think it's very necessary to take stock of what have we achieved in Saga. Now, as you said, I think we have to go beyond the branding issue and say that we need the equivalent of a fact sheet.
Yes.
A fact sheet on security, a fact sheet on growth, and also get a sense about who has been responsible and what is the accountability
Yes.
within the matrix of the Indian government. My
Yes.
lighter vein comment is that the Indian government is like an octopus, meaning that one side sometimes doesn't know what the other is doing, and they are differently spread. I remember once we had done an exercise when I was at the National Maritime Foundation, and I think we came up with a number of something like 19 or 21 separate ministries and departments that have some kind of a locus in terms of the governance of the maritime domain. So my submission as an outsider is that we need a fact sheet on Sagar. What has Sagar achieved in 10 years? It may be available in bits and pieces
Yes.
with different ministries, different think tanks. For instance, the NMF itself is quite
Yes.
involved in this endeavor.
Yes.
And the other, and here again I'll defer to your experience because you have served in Sardar Patel Bhavan and so on, that the maritime domain and the security compulsion comes onto the Indian radar in the wake of 2008, the Mumbai attack.
Yeah.
That's the first time we as a people, citizens of India, become aware of our vulnerability
Yes.
and what kind of challenges have to be addressed from the maritime side. That was 2008. So I would also make a case that Sagar should be applied to India, meaning there must be security and growth for your own people, for your own coastal states, frankly, for all of India.
Yes.
And only then can you say that I have a template that I can take to a Maldives, I can take to a Sri Lanka. So there is harmony in effort. I don't know that at the moment. I know that years ago we tried to talk to some of the coastal states, and interestingly, I'm only sharing this anecdotally. I remember Mr. Parikar, Manohar Parikar, who a former defense minister, but was also chief minister Goa.
Yes.
He was very receptive, to this idea because these are, I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago. And I thought that when we were at the NMF, that if we want to sell the concept that coastal states of India must become stakeholders
Yes.
in India's blue economy, in India's exploitation of the maritime resources, they are the people on the ground. So in principle, everybody agreed in Delhi and said, okay, you're a think tank guy, so you try and float the balloon. Of all the states that I knocked at, which means that you have to go to the chief minister's office and say that, can we sort of give him a presentation kind of thing, it was Goa that was most receptive. And as I said, unfortunately, he didn't stay long enough in office in Goa. But I make that point again, that we should also look at how coastal states are responding to the Prime Minister's call for Sagar. I haven't seen anything. I mean, the few times that I've, again, informally gone and found out, by and large, it's a bit like post-2008, meaning the Navy, the Coast Guard have become very conscious about the need for security. Yeah. Some states, and I want to name them, I gather Tamil Nadu was very quick off the block in terms of the local police. I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago. So my submission to you again, because you have a wide footprint on your program and it reaches the policymakers, that do we have a sense about to what degree are our coastal states involved and have become stakeholders in a very committed way? If the answer is yes, then you have a kind of harmony. Your Indian domestic context of Sagar is effective. Then take it to the first island chain equivalent, which is the nearest islands, and then you scale up to Mahasagar. So I'll stop here and say that we have to do our homework in relation to Sagar before we think about Mahasagar.
So I would agree, sir, an audit is always useful. So I'm not, in any way saying, but frankly, a lot has happened already, sir. I mean, firstly, if you take the two subsets, if you take security and growth as two separate subsets, in the field of security, I think the biggest change has been the setting up of the Office of the National Maritime Security Coordinators.
Yeah.
Where you had, this domain was spread across numerous agencies all across government. So if I recollect the numbers at 25 or 27 different agencies, you brought all to a common table. So you brought all where you've not only, and it's gone down, it's not a central organization. So in each state, in each coastal UT, you have a state or a UT maritime equivalent of a maritime security coordinator. So they meet regularly, they have a common agenda. There are numerous issues that we have. Just to give you an example, for example, sub 20 meters, as you know, AIS is not a requirement, and therefore you can't keep track of fishing boats which are, which are sub 20 meter in length. The rollout of transponders, for example, so that you can track all these vessels. Something that would have seemed difficult a few years back, but through a dedicated and concerted effort of the Office of the National Maritime Security Coordinator, with getting all parties on board, because you have to, it requires a tech solution, there has to be a space-based solution, you have the fisheries department, you have the maritime police, everyone has to come to the table.
Absolutely.
And then you roll out a system which is now in the process of being rolled out, where at least you identify a gap and you bridge that gap, or you secure that gap to whatever extent you can. Of course, this is always going to be work in progress. Another example, for example, is the revision of India's, let's say, of the coastline length from 7,500 kilometers to around 11,027, I think, kilometers, which was recently promulgated. I mean, it might sound small, but in a sense that this has been, it increases the maritime character of a nation, your length of your coastline.
I agree.
Naming of islands, promulgation of our baselines on the east coast of the Andamans, which was something that was pending for years together. Revision of your baselines. These are all numerous issues that were pending, which had huge security implications, which are progressively being addressed by an organization which is chartered to do so. So similarly, of course, the NMSC is focused on security. Growth is largely a parallel organization in Niti Aayog, which is, which has been the architect, and I would say at some ways of Sagar Mala, for instance, of making sure that maritime connectivity and in the maritime domain. So I think the problem is that while we have a certain degree of coherence which has come in, but we're still operating in two different pockets. I mean, security and growth are still operating in two different pockets. The time has come to bring these two together and to externalize this, sir, because finally you're going to use this as an instrument of engaging other nations in your periphery and beyond. Sir. So if you want to do that, then Sagar and Mahasagar have to be elevated to a mission.
Absolutely.
So if you have a mission, Mahasagar, I'm not saying you put up a huge secretariat and you staff it, etc. You just set up within your existing structure. If you have you identify people and you task an organization which is going to be assume leadership for Mahasagar. You articulate a certain goals and you develop one so that it goes beyond a statement and goes into specific requirements. And then you have a multi-agency process where you get people together and you prioritize and you see, because resources are always scarce. So you have to, so how you're going to deploy these resources is going to be an issue that you will have to see. So all this has to be sort of done, and in that sense, I would think it would be useful that we elevate it to a mission with a minimal staffing, lay down objectives, and you have periodic review meetings. So you bring everyone to the table and get these two dimensions together, and as you said, you have an auditing scheme maybe every year as to what your goals were and where you reached.
No, Monty, I fully agree. And let me sort of reel back and make 3-4 broad kind of points to dot the I's in terms of chronology. First of all, when I said that Prime Minister Modi is to be commended for envisioning and announcing Sagar, he is not the first Prime Minister. You will recall that Mr. Vajpayee had initiated Sagar Mala. It's just that it didn't take off for a variety of reasons, but there was a certain thinking, within South Bloc, within the PMO about the maritime thing. And I even know anecdotally again that one of the things that Mr. Brijesh Mishra used to say in lighter vein, because if you remember, he was the first national security advisor. Those were the years when I was in the IDSA. And one of the jokes was that we have a standard line on maritime presentation that India is sea blind. That as a nation, we are not aware of our maritime heritage, and as they say, मजाक में हम कहते थे कि भाई इंडिया का जो मैप है उल्टा कर दो, so that you see the whole peninsula jutting into the ocean kind of thing. So these are thoughts and ideas, which I would say were germinating. To Mr. Modi's credit, he was able to infuse a certain energy into it. But like any prime minister, he's got many things that he has to, look at. I think, Sagar needs much greater bench strength to be a reality at the level that he had envisioned it, for it to become Mahasagar. You will forgive me for making the same point again. I think it was a great initiative in terms of governance of the great octopus that we set up the office of a maritime security coordinator. This is again joke in
Yes.
governance. Unless you have a file, unless you have an officer, like in MEA they used to say, unless there's a joint secretary for a particular issue or a division, it won't move. And India's great, Houdini trick was that if you wanted to keep anything secret, don't have a file, like we did on the nuclear issue. No, that whole thing moved without a file. But in lighter vein, I'm saying, more seriously, that having set up the office of the MSC, Admiral Ashok was the first coordinator, right? I think it will be useful for the system internally to do an audit. To what extent was the first MSC able to move the needle in terms of Modi vision of Saga? If you get some answers there, then you have a template to scale up. But if you don't do that exercise and don't do it objectively, then it might become more optics. That's what I fear.
But I think so that exercise
is going on.
To the best, and not only is going on, it's an ongoing sort of NMSC lays down certain goals, review meetings. So I think that is an ongoing exercise. But I think Sagar is a lot beyond securities.
Absolutely.
So in a sense that security, I would say, growth has a potential to be the much larger element in Sagar than security. So therefore, it's growth, if you ask me, which is more fundamental, and that has to be mainstream.
Does the MSC look after growth? I'm just asking.
He does.
In which case, I'm saying you need a similar vertical, like you just said, that the MSC has been able to bring all these 20 odd bodies under one table. At least, there's some sense of a holistic overview. I submit for the consideration of the system that is looking at maritime governance and Mahasagar, that growth has to also be addressed in a very focused way, meaning have one body, whether it's in Niti Aayog, whether it is outside of Niti Aayog, within PMO, outside PMO, that's a matter of detail of governance. But unless that is identified, and that should go back to the states. I must show that my coastal states are benefiting from the Modi vision of Mahasagar. Only then can you take it to a Sri Lanka or a Maldives or wherever. I mean, even tourism. If India's coastal tourism picks up traction, the same kind of model can be applied hypothetically, to a Maldives or a Mauritius or a Sri Lanka if they want that kind of cooperation with you. As opposed to people going to Phuket or Thailand, we should say that Indian Ocean Islands offer you an option. I'm just giving this as a very rudimentary example. So that's what I mean by saying that growth needs a Sherpa. I don't think we have that Sherpa, is my reading, but you know better.
So I'm not too sure of the internal dynamics of Niti Aayog as to, but I know that they have a maritime sort of subset within them, which tries to see, and they've pushed out a large number of maritime policies, etc., which brings together everyone. But as it has to be more than that. It has to be more than a document. It has to be more than, there has to be, nothing happens without a structure, if you ask me, at the end of the day. So that structure has to be created. And as I've said earlier, you need not invest too much into creating a new organization. You get representatives from existing organizations that meet periodically from time to time, and then you to review where you are and what you need to do moving ahead. So just one last question I thought I'll ask you before we sort of wind up is that, when we talk about advancement, like in Mahasagar, we're talking about advancement, mutual and holistic advancement of security. And so you're taking Sagar Plus. This advancement, you feel, is more required in depth or in spread? I mean, do you think we should take it, and in spread, does it need to extend beyond the IOR? Does it need to go into the Southern Pacific Islands, for example, or should we sort of focused more on our immediate periphery? And
my reading again is that my interpretation. I don't think there's a very clear blueprint as yet as to what Mahasagar means, but I would interpret it in the following way. That first of all, the geographical scope has to be greater than that of Saga. Because Sagar was confined to Indian Ocean.
Yes.
Repeatedly, they would say security and growth for all in the region, in brackets, Indian Ocean region. My submission here is that I think Mahasagar should look at a wider geographical footprint, meaning go all the way up to East Africa.
Right.
Go beyond the island states. I don't think we have the capacity and the wherewithal to go into the South Pacific at this point in time, which is why I'm saying that, establish your credibility and the ability to deliver in the first, smaller geography. And then you can think of a larger geography. But the reason I'm mentioning East Africa in particular is because in the decades ahead, I expect that India and China would be, jostling for a variety of issues. There'd be competition between India and China as I see it across all domains: political, economic, trade, maritime, etc. etc. So I think we should invest in East Africa, apart from the fact that we already have a hydrocarbon and various other initiatives that are slowly taking root. That's the geographical part of Mahasagar. The second is I think India should play to its strengths, which is that the digital part, in terms of technology, India has, I think, certain niche capabilities. These have to be scaled up, meaning that at the moment we are still in the infancy of AI, cyber, digital, etc. But they're all connected. The ocean and cyber and space and spectrum is the new continuum. India has some niche strength and capability there. I think we should look at that as part of the advancement in terms of both security and growth for countries and societies that we engage with. And one last point, I can't resist adding this. I think India should also be able to take the lead in looking at the health of the ocean. The hydrographic
Right.
part. At the moment, there is a huge climate change related kind of disaster that is waiting to happen. One doesn't know when it will happen, that if the temperatures go up by even as much as a quarter of a degree, I'm told that there would be all kinds of, cataclysmic, is that the right word? Or
Yes.
very serious issues for the food chain.
Right.
And if that happens, human security will get impacted very, very seriously. So I think we should be able to do the first kind of rough cut of the health of the Indian Ocean and make an assessment and share it with the larger community, both regional and global, because again, all the oceans are connected.
Right.
So here I think India should take the lead, and perhaps if we are able to have that kind of a political kind of ability, we should engage with China on this one issue, because this is so big.
Yes.
It affects the whole planet. So I'm saying that is how I would interpret the advancement in terms of the security growth specific to the maritime, that it's not just geography.
Yes.
There are various other strands that we could perhaps explore in a creative way.
So that's absolutely, I would concur, agree with you, sir, entirely. So just to sum up, sir, I would say just firstly, of course, these are, important policy statements which clearly bring out, it shows the investment and the desire of the Indian government to get involved in not only in the maritime domain and a greater periphery, sir. And these are instruments that have to be utilized to the fullest. For that, the first thing is that while you might have an implementing, they say in the subtext that the implementing agency of SAGAR has been the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, the IPOI. But that is more at the think tank level.
Yeah.
It's not enough to be at the think tank level, or it might be track 1.5. Government has to get wholly and solely involved in this to make it successful, sir.
Absolutely.
And for that, you require structure. There's no getting around structure. So elevate SAGAR or MAHASAGAR into a mission, and you put the requisite structure in place to do that. Second, I would say, is again on the branding issue, that you're doing a lot of stuff in penny pockets all over the place. Bring it all together.
Absolutely.
And you bring it so it looks larger than life, sir. That you create that, where you bring it all together with a branding exercise, etc. So that's a second issue. And lastly, I like your suggestion also, sir, is that for this to be everything has to spread from your coastline. So your coast, the benefits have to be clear to all, that this sort of bringing everyone together has immediate benefits, and from there it goes to your immediate periphery, and then thereafter your distant periphery. So as your capacities increase and as people understand that these are the benefits, then it gives you that much more, I would say, heft in driving this policy forward, when the benefits are apparent for all to be part of it. So would you agree
No,
with this
I agree
formulation?
absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about the way in which we should proceed. Can I just add one more line, which is to say that in addition to everything that you said, which I agree with, I think we should have the confidence to say that we can do it. Meaning,
Yes.
India was able to succeed in terms of the Green Revolution. You remember the Green
Yes.
Revolution? It was something that Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister was able to envision.
Yes.
After that, the team did the heavy lifting, and that team was led by very, very capable cabinet ministers, not just one, not two, a number of them, Jagjeevan Ram, C. Subramaniam, various others, and high caliber professionals like Professor Swaminathan, Alok Rai, etc. I'm forgetting the name, Ajay Rai, I think, but there were a number of highly regarded professionals at the global level. They were part of the Green Revolution, and every state became a stakeholder,
Right.
from Punjab all the way down. I think we need to believe that India's future and prosperity lies in the blue revolution. That is something that Prime Minister Modi, he's a great orator, he's a great communicator, it should be added into his speeches. And the last point is that every time we talk about India geographically, standard reference is Kashmir to Kanyakumari. We have to add Kashmir to Kanyakumari, Andaman to L&M. Andaman,
Yes.
Nicobar, Lakshadweep, Minicoy. That is the greater India, which also brings in the maritime. So Indian citizens have to think maritime.
Yeah.
And perhaps Modi can pull that off.
So remains for me, sir, once again to thank you for participating and to all our viewers for netting in. Delightful to have you all over there, and delightful to have Cmde Uday Bhaskar as my guest. And look forward to joining you back sometime in the future.
Thank you, Monty.
Right.